Welcome to Let's Talk Global Business, the show in which we look at the economic and business trends connecting the world. I'm Sara Murray, Managing Director International at the Conference Board, the member-led global think tank that delivers trusted insights for what's ahead. In this special edition, we're departing from our usual two-region focus to partner with our sister podcast from the Conference Board, C-Suite Perspectives. If you listened to the most recent episode of C-Suite Perspectives, you'll know that it featured an interview with Rita Meyerson, principal researcher from the Human Capital Center in the US, on a new report that she has co-authored with Marion Devine, principal researcher from the Human Capital Center in Europe. Well, today I'm joined by Marion to take a look at the European implications of that report. Marion, welcome to Let's Talk Global Business.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you for inviting me to talk about a topic that's critical for businesses and which I very much personally care about too. So thank you.
So, Marion, you and Rita have written this report called The Next Frontier for Employee Wellbeing. Your thesis is that although HR leaders are investing more than ever in employee well-being, actually employee happiness has stagnated, and therefore employers need to rethink their approach to well-being. Is that a fair summary?
I think it is indeed, Sarah. I think that businesses have made huge strides in recognizing the importance of well-being, and they really have invested in employee assistance programs. But despite this, our research is showing that well-being levels are stalling. And I think that what that's telling us is that fostering well-being requires continuous effort, and senior leaders need to keep prioritizing and even reprioritizing well-being, looking at further ways to embed it into the business, into the culture, to really fully realize its benefits, which are around engagement and productivity and retention.
So to frame our conversation today, let me start by asking you, how do you define well-being? What does it mean for employees in the workplace?
I think that is such a critical question, because if you in an organization don't define it, then it makes it so much harder to know what you're talking about, to know what you're working on, to know what you could be measuring as well. And it reflects this recognition that well-being isn't just about physical health, but there's a whole spectrum of an individual's life that counts. And it's also a reflection that the well-being of employees is connected to the vitality of the organization, especially its resilience to navigate through complexity, rapid change, all these things that take a huge toll on people.
So if we think about why invest in well-being, what are employees in Europe feeling about their employers' commitment to well-being at the moment?
Well, I think it's a very interesting sort of glance that we've had. Really, we fielded a survey in January, and we received about 1,300 responses in the US and about 231 in Europe. I think that one of the most positive findings is that 80% of the European employees report that their organisation is committed to their well-being, which is great news. We also saw that European employees, again 80%, believe that their immediate supervisor genuinely cares about their well-being. And in fact, in the US, it was slightly higher at 87%. And they also said a good 84% of the European respondents said that well-being is addressed in employee communications at least quarterly. So overall, this is really suggesting that immediate supervisors and employee communications are playing a very big part in a general sense that, yes, my company does really care about my well-being. So that's very good news.
And what evidence is there? You talked earlier about well-being is important because it helps with business outcomes. What evidence is there to suggest that it is linked to business outcomes?
There is now a wealth of empirical evidence, a really solid evidence base that links well-being to a variety of positive business outcomes. So, for example, there are some great studies around health and well-being and productivity of employees, surveys that include over 1 million employees, and it's found this consistent relationship between employee well-being and firm performance. It's positively associated with customer loyalty. So when you have employees who feel that the company cares for them, that their well-being is pretty good, this is reflected in their customer relationships. Well-being is also associated with reduced staff turnover. Social well-being, connection and belonging, actually is linked with better collaboration. So if you are really trying to get a more collaborative and innovative culture, look at social well-being. And of course, very obviously, poor physical well-being is linked to absenteeism and mental health also uh, can lead to employee burnout. So there's plenty of positives, and there's also a lot of evidence about the lack of well-being and the damage this does to individuals and to the organization. And I think one good example is Unilever has calculated that a return of £10 for every £1 spent on well-being. So the company has been very vocal in saying, investing in well-being really does pay all sorts of dividends, not least financial.
And if we think about investing in well-being, how does that help the larger C-suite priorities? Because from our C-suite survey that we do every year, those priorities are very much on how to attract and retain talent.
I think that for attracting and retaining talent, well-being is absolutely vital. There's a very large LinkedIn study that shows that 80% of employees would consider leaving their current job for one that places a greater emphasis on health and well-being. So it's a major talent attraction lever. And we've seen that in our research into Gen Z. They have very high expectations of their employees. They expect leaders who genuinely care for them. They expect their organizations to look after their well-being, especially their mental health. They want to have social connection, and they also really want to progress and have opportunities to grow and thrive. So Gen Z, who will be soon the biggest cohort globally, in Europe they're very small, but nonetheless critical. I think for older workers, it's also important, especially as we have an aging working population. You can think about, the run up to retirement. You can think about preventative measures just to ensure that people can keep working productively and enjoy their work. So I think it's, there's plenty of evidence to show that it's very critical for both talent attraction and retention.
Just moving slightly in a different area, the role of the CHRO. How are European CHROs, promoting the business case for wellbeing initiatives?
I think that something, I mean, I've noticed personally, because we started doing at the conference board, we started researching into well-being before the pandemic, and I think that something that I've really seen personally is how CEOs are really showing that well-being is a top priority. They are speaking out so much more vocally about the importance, sharing their own personal experiences, and I think that's been very, very significant. There are leading voices from um, obviously Unilever, but in terms of European businesses, Siemens, Merck, Nestle, a lot of companies, and also some very big companies like Microsoft, PwC, Lena Nair, who's now CEO of Chanel. These executives have been speaking out about the importance of well-being. And there are also some global movements again, where CEOs are forming sort of a global coalitions and signing various sort of signatories to say how important they think well-being is. So I think that CHROs and CEOs are taking a really, really big role in saying that well-being is important for us as individuals and for our businesses.
It's been a real step forward in that regard since the pandemic. And how would you say that the views of the CEO and the CHRO align or conflict with other C-suite leaders in the organization?
Well, I think that's a really interesting question. Again, I think at the moment we're very aware that in these very difficult business times, there are a lot of priorities that CEOs are juggling with in a very volatile and difficult business environment. And so it's not that well-being has been deprioritized necessarily, but it's certainly jostling for attention.
What I really hear from you, Marion, is well-being needs to be a continuous effort within organisations. There needs to be a lot more work done to embed well-being into the culture and the business, and link it to engagement and retention. Having a definition that everyone understands and is clear on of well-being, that it helps people to thrive. It's not just physical. There's lots of different dimensions: emotional, professional, financial, social. There's been a big shift in that employees really expect companies to provide this. If they don't, it can put a company at a competitive disadvantage in terms of employee value proposition. Lots of evidence that it is very much linked to business outcomes. Keeping it as a top priority is kind of the difficulty right now with everything that other leaders are dealing with. So how to walk the talk, and how to make the time for that, is something that leaders really need to be mindful of. So we're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll continue this discussion on well-being for businesses in Europe. If you're interested in Rita's perspective on this, do go to the most recent episode of C-Suite Perspectives, where they look at the US results of the report. We'll be back after the break.
Are you ready for the future of business? This year we are launching our international conference series. Curious about emerging trends for rewards globally? Join us June 20th to 21st in Brussels for Future Reward Europe. Tap into the power of ecosystems at Future, Innovate and Transform, November 13th in Amsterdam. You can find details on the programme at conference-board.org/conferences. Join us to get inspired, gain actionable solutions, and connect with global peers.
Hello and welcome back to this conversation with Marion Devine. We're talking about well-being and its importance in C-suite priorities for 2024. I want to start by talking a bit about the situation in Europe specifically. Marion, in your report, you found that 70% of workers report that their well-being is the same or worse than 6 months ago. I mean, what does this imply in terms of what the data says about employee happiness and business responses? Can you give some concrete examples?
Yes, Sarah. I think that well-being is something that's dynamic. It changes. It doesn't stay the same. And so, of course, what's happening within the business and externally has an impact. So in Europe, we know that the external environment is difficult and challenging. We've seen war in Europe, and we know from conversations at the conference board that our companies have really had to respond to a lot of anxiety, some very strong emotions among their employees, and we've also had some of our CEOs talking about how they personally, picked up the phone or talked directly to an employee who's been affected by this. So I think that geopolitical problems in Europe take their toll. The cost of living and financial pressures, again, had a very turbulent time. Cost of living is a huge concern to many employees, a lot of pressure on incomes and pay. And we saw that when we did a survey with our leaders of total rewards in some of Europe's biggest companies, they actually said to us that they were prioritizing their financial well-being strategies above other things. They were looking at how they could support employees to understand better finances, take control, make good decisions, and just be better protected against unexpected events. So that was a very, I think, positive. Another toll on well-being, I think, across Europe is huge concern about the environment, climate change. We ran again a survey about eco-anxiety, and we found that employees are experiencing very high levels of anxiety and uncertainty, and even to the point where it's affecting their focus, their sleep. And we've talked again to our own leaders of well-being about what they were doing about this, and they were saying about how the need to be more aware of this, to give space to employees to talk about it, and to also see what they can do at a sort of personal level to take, concrete positive action in their own context in the workplace, which we know helps to alleviate people's anxieties.
Excellent. And do you have any best practices of getting the entire organization to have kind of an all hands on deck approach, and how they kind of make this part of the business strategy and avoid it being another cost competing issue?
It's clear from our own research that, at the end of the day, you do have to have a good functioning employee assistance program. So that has to be the sort of hygiene factor. It has to be there. But the real challenge is, as you say, really embedding it into the culture, into the whole DNA. So I think that one thing that sort of the more forward-looking companies, and those that perhaps are more advanced, is being very effective at for HR to connect internal stakeholders, key ones who need to be involved in, maybe scaling up local initiatives or enterprise-wide programs and efforts and messaging. And I think that sometimes well-being can get a little bit siloed. So you can have different important stakeholders a little bit scattered over the organization. So bringing them together, HR can really do that to get this sort of holistic narrative and an overall, coherent strategy for well-being. I think another second one that I would really emphasize is just never being complacent that the business case is clear. Just keep on emphasizing the business case and really taking evidence-based data. There is so much external data, and increasingly companies can pull on internal data to show the different facets of well-being and how they do impact performance, attrition, engagement levels, etc. So I think evidence-based data is really important. And I would hold up NatWest Group as being really forward in this area. And they have a well-being sort of index that they link with other indices. And so they really look as well at the role of well-being for productivity, engagement, and also in terms of leadership effectiveness. And then, of course, dialogue. Keep talking to your employees. Don't assume you know. Talk to different segments of employees. Really encourage partnership in terms of working together to improve well-being. Include works councils and trade unions. They are big, big stakeholders, and often they're doing fantastic work themselves. And employee resource groups who might actually have a good sense of a particular group and their needs in terms of well-being. So I think that there's all sorts of things that HR can do to just pull together, scale up, reinforce, amplify some great things that are already happening.
How can HR hold leaders accountable? What are some of the methods that you've seen good companies adopt to make sure that the leaders walk the talk?
Senior leaders are now, increasingly their pay and reward is being linked to ESG, and the social and ESG, diversity and inclusion is very much part of that. So I think that we'll see well-being starting to be incorporated into that, so that when companies that are linking pay to ESG, well-being will be part of that as much as diversity and inclusion is. So I think that that's sort of one thing. I think that we've certainly seen in our work on leadership that companies are really starting to, I think, understand and prioritize some of those behaviors and skills that are linked to well-being. And we know that this is what workers increasingly want and expect, and B, that it makes sense in a very, very uncertain and sometimes very pressurized environment. If we want to support people to be at their best, we do need to think about their well-being. So I think that that's another thing's action to embed well-being and the behaviours around well-being into leadership models, and then obviously to be measuring, rewarding, acknowledging leaders in that area. So I think that those two are quite powerful to hold leaders to account. And then again, I think as companies like NatWest Group do, bringing that data to leaders in a way that's positive, so that if you are doing some sort of engagement survey and you've got some well-being linked questions, you might see some hotspots in the organisation where well-being looks like it's suffering a little bit. Using that as a really positive way to talk to leaders about how their own teams, their own parts of the business.
So what I'm hearing, Marion, again is, embedding this into the organisation. It's about responsibility for wellbeing beyond HR to the whole organisation. Embed wellbeing into enterprise-wide communication and branding. Hold managers accountable by integrating it into performance management systems, and potentially modify some of the leadership development programs so that these behaviours are modelled, that support well-being. Encourage employees also via the employee, resource groups to also contribute to collective well-being and share the information, share it publicly, show the progress, be transparent, have a continuous dialogue, because as you said earlier, you never arrive. It's a continually changing thing because of all the external events that are going on in the world, and certainly a much more uncertain and volatile world. Well, that brings us to the end of this episode of Let's Talk Global Business. We'll be back next time with a focus on a new topic. You can find Marion's report on wellbeing, as well as listen to the entire catalogue of podcast programming from the conference board by visiting our website, conference-board.org. Thank you, Marion, for sharing your insights with us, and see you next time.